Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the writer of the upcoming FML over at Dark Horse Comics. It's Kelly Sue DeConnick. Thanks for coming on to Kelly Sue.
Hello.
So you are approaching the launch of a new creator-owned series, FML, which we're here to talk about, and we will at great lengths. But let's start with the basics.
Okay.
How are you doing? Where are your stress levels right now?
Oh my God. Through the roof. Like a cartoon of a volcano that is doing volcano things. Erupting, I guess, is what volcanoes do. Yeah. I mean, it's just one component of the world, as we were kind of talking about right before we started. But I don't know that I've ever been this stressed out, to be honest with you. Like, it's a thing. And launching my first creator-owned book in 10 years in a market I'm no longer quite as familiar with is not putting me at ease.
So are you saying like holistic stress or specific stress to this book? Do you find this book unusually stressful relative to other ones you've taken on?
Ooh, no, I don't. It's just, when you do a creator-owned book in this industry, in my experience anyway, you're going to be marketing yourself, whether it's a creator-owned book or not. If you want the book to succeed, you need to do a certain amount of marketing. I think the marketing folks in all of these different publishing houses are overworked, and they don't have time to get to know you as well as would benefit developing a marketing strategy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there's just no way around the fact that you have to do it yourself. And it's an uncomfortable thing for a lot of us. And I think it's an uncomfortable thing for most of us, to be honest. And so I do a certain amount of it, whether it's a creator-owned book or not. But because I haven't launched a creator-owned book since Bitch Planet, which was a good while ago now, I haven't gone through this process in a long time. And the market has changed considerably. And the internet has changed, and my life has changed. And so there's just a lot of reconfiguring to do. As far as the book itself goes, no, it's not. I mean, it's stressful because there's a million things I want to do both in it and to support it. And I don't have time to do all of them. But I actually quite love working on this book.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the comic itself. FML is your upcoming 8-issue series at Dark Horse. This is going to be a long spiel, so I apologize in advance.
Oh, please.
8-issue series at Dark Horse that you're tackling with your Captain Marvel pal, David López, colorist Chris Peter, and letterer Clayton Coles, amongst others. And it launches with its first issue on November 6th. To take a line out of, I believe, the solicit, FML is a genre-busting apocalyptic odyssey about a group of metal kids who face a medley of bizarre foes and encounters in Portland, Oregon during a worldwide pandemic, and explores the ins and outs of their stories from the perspective of different characters, with teenager Riley being the POV character in the first issue, and his mom, Patricia, aka Patty Cake, aka Mom, being the POV character in the first or second issue. So I don't often do this. This is part of the reason why I want to talk about the book at great length, instead of making this holistic, broad conversation. This is my favorite thing you've ever written. And honestly, this is the best first and second issue I've read this entire year. I think it is absolutely astonishing work. We'll get into why.
David!
What? The funny, so here's the thing that I think is interesting. So you're talking about the stress levels, and you're talking about all this stuff. It's like story, chaotic energy that is absolutely focused into an incredible point by you and by David. And I think it is just a spectacular book. Anyways, we will get into that. I know the idea of you and David working together on creator-owned project has like dated back to like you guys having a meal before the Captain Marvel premiere.
Yep.
It's been a long time. Can you walk me through the story behind the story? Because it seems like that was a lot to get to the point where you're actually doing this book.
Yeah. And so another thing that's kind of interesting is, all right, so just walking it back, this is the first time I remember talking about it, but we were at dinner with our families in LA before the premiere of the Captain Marvel movie. And David said we should do something creator owned. And at the time I was like, sure. It was like, I would love to work with you again, David, but I don't have an idea that feels like a David idea.
Right.
It was just like, yes, theoretically we'll do that when the right idea comes up. And And we'd also joked about, felt like I spent the entire run of Captain Marvel trying to figure out how to write for David. David's artistic style is very cartoony. It's very expressive. It's very David, actually. You know how sometimes you look at an artist's work and you're like, oh, it looks like you. You know, it looks like him in a non-literal way. Like he's not an artist who draws his face all the time. It's not, you don't look at the characters and see, oh, that's David's face, but you see his person in the way everybody is very effusive. And so I kept trying to match his energy, and I just felt like I was chasing him, like it wasn't working, like I kept trying to like lighter, bigger, broader. And the last issue we did together was the issue where I was writing about, it was my farewell to the character, and my great aunt, who I had based my version of Tracy on, had died of cancer. And Tracy's whole cancer journey had been my experience with my great aunt. And so I was writing Carol grieving Tracy, and it was a grief issue and a goodbye issue. And so I just stopped trying, and I was just like, okay,
stop trying to chase David.
Yes, because this issue is not people chewing bubble gum. It's not big and like, and I was just like, I'm just gonna write what I think this needs to be, and we'll figure it out. It's our best issue, hands down, easily our best issue together of that run. And it's like, oh, awesome. I figured it out on the last issue, which was like, don't try to chase him. Like, give him something to connect to and he'll find the moments, And so I knew I wanted to do something more with that knowledge, right? But then over the years, we would bat back and forth a couple of different things, and nothing ever really connected. And there was a moment I remember where he really loves D&D, and he wanted to do like a fantasy thing. And I was, if that's not my jam, like no judgment, but it's just not for me. And I knew I would be faking it. It would be sort of fraudulent. And, and at one point I was like, I don't know where like we talked about like a magic school. And I was like, yeah, I don't want to write Hogwarts or whatever. And Matt suggested, he was like, well, if Hogwarts is the Eton of magical schools, what if you wrote about the DeVry of magical schools? Which I was like, oh, God damn it. That's so good. So I spent a little while trying to I came up with some characters that had like, either they were really good at a really useless part of magic, like I can fix chairs, or, something that was like not useless, but mundane. Yeah, less flashy.
Yeah.
And I think there was something with cheese. I had a character that did something with cheese. I remember it was like they could make anything out of cheese or turn anything into cheese or something like that. I spent some time on that. It just didn't go anywhere. And then I had a mother-son idea, but the mom was dead, and she had been a musician. She was like a fronted a punk band, but she OD'd and she was gone. And so there was this young adult who he didn't know who his father was. There were several people that might have been his father, but he didn't know and didn't really want to know. But he was kind of a nerd, and he had an adventuring party, a D&D party that lived in his head that was these 5 very male archetypes, but as interpreted through fantasy icons, like the wizard and the
rogue,
the brute, the brute. Brute isn't one. The barbarian.
Yeah.
And so they acted like this advisory group of fathers kind of commenting on his life and encouraging him to do things and not to do things. And so I started working on that. And then there was a like, well, what if they aren't just in his head? What if they are really, if their world really exists and he is the one that can kind of, so we started working on that. 8 pages of this were drawn, not finished, but drawn.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, David, it doesn't work. I'm sorry. Let me have another go. And then I finally had to just be like, I can't shoehorn the D&D stuff in. You can just tell that I brushed up on it. It's not something I know. I'm faking it. And I don't like that feeling. And I think it shows on the page. And David was like, yeah, I don't care. Like, let's write what is exciting. And then I turned in my next, like, okay, here's where I think we're going. And he got so enthusiastic about it. To write for somebody who's like, I love this so much that I want to do all of these. Look, I made some stickers of all the different, and just, it made it this absolute joy. And also, in the years since we worked together, I've gotten better at my job. I didn't think about the fact that he's gotten better at his job too.
Oh, yeah.
And so it was just crazy to be like, oh, yeah, look what 10 years of practice will do,
Yeah. I mean, that's a really big part of it, because I've long been a big fan of David. I think that he has always been a very underrated artist, and he's just such a good storyteller. His art is incredible in general, but this is a completely different level. This is some of the best art I've seen in any comic in I don't even know how long. It is like absolutely unbelievable stuff. And the thing that I think is really impressive about it is that it goes beyond style, and it's like so fully integrating style and storytelling into one thing, where it's like there are these clear stylistic shifts in the series art wise, some of which are tied to certain cast members and kind of their perception and how they like show up in the world. And it really feels like an artist at the peak of his powers, a writer at the peak of her powers, and two people who are so attuned to each other that they know the right way to bring the story together. And that's the thing that got me really excited, is it's somehow really grounded but completely insane at the same time, and it's spectacular because of it.
Yeah, he's been asked to do something really difficult here. He has, so for folks who are listening who haven't seen any of this, there are 3 distinct styles in the book. And of course, they're all David.
Mm-hmm.
There's an objective style, quote unquote objective style, that is more of the drawing style that you're used to from David. And then there's Riley's drawing style. Riley's this like teenage metal kid who's kind of processing the world through his sketchbook, and he likes to draw monsters and, horror stuff. And then there's his mom, who is a working cartoonist and a former riot girl. She started cartooning because she had a zine. So her style has kind of developed in that very indie Pacific Northwest kind of look. And he captures them beautifully. And then all of these things interact with one another. And then he's also even put in the effort. There's a 4th style, a little bit, that you see a little bit, that's like Patty, it's young Patty figuring out what she wanted to do. It's more her style when she had her zine and whatnot. And you get some glimpses of that as well. But he makes them work together, so they're distinct and disparate, but they're not incongruous on the same page. It's really difficult what he pulls off.
And sometimes they accent or complement each other in really interesting ways. Like one of the characters, one of the members of STFU, Riley's band, the heavy metal band, is Savvy, or Savage Slaughter, which is an unbelievable name. When she shows up and it's like Riley's art accenting her with like lightning bolts around her. I mean, like that stuff, it's unbelievable. I mean, it's just like absolutely next level comic booking. I did want to ask, did you two talk about that? Or did David just show up and he's just like, what do you think about this? Like, how did that stuff come together?
That page, I don't remember.
I just mean all of it.
Oh, all of it. Oh, no. Yes. We did absolutely talk about the fact that we wanted to have different styles and to have, so in the scripts, I refer to when the characters appear and comment on the story, I refer to them as Chibi, even though they don't look like Chibi. So they're scripted as Chibi Riley and Chibi Mom.
Sure.
That was a whole conversation about what is that going to look like and how do we make it clear. Chibi Mom stuff has to always be in black and white, and Chibi Riley stuff is always with the lined paper.
Mm-hmm.
And when the two interact, how does that work? And yeah, there were a lot of really great conversations about that. And one of the things that we've been doing is we do a 2-hour call every other week where we kind of check in with each other about, if he's got layouts, we go over all of the layouts. I go over where I am script or story wise. And it allows for the conversation that I like to have. We talked about this a little bit when we talked about Historia, that, I think the reason Historia is what it is because of the conversations that Phil and I had to set it off. And there's so much back and forth, so much that isn't in the script. But I've always worked that way. I work that way with Emma. I work that way with Val. Like, if the artist will give me their ear, like, I really want the work to be a conversation. And that every other Thursday phone call is where a lot of this will happen. And the fact that David is okay with my being like, hey, I know that I said this in the script, but I don't think it's working. Can we change this segment? And he's like, yeah, totally. What do you want to do? And that's incredible. That's an incredible gift. And like, there's stuff too that, like, in issue 2, my favorite page in the book is one of the ones where the two Chibis are talking and Mom is remembering when she went into shock in school. And there's that panel where it looks like a dollhouse. That is, I think, a third draft. And when he came up with that, I was like, oh my God, that does exactly what memory is supposed to do. Like, it gives you the distance, like you're looking at a model of a thing, not a thing that really happened, and just that subtle thing that he does in the one panel there where he puts the panel into perspective. So the panel itself is like a room in a dollhouse, and Riley is looking around that panel into the previous panel. That moment communicates everything that whole page is trying to talk about memory, or trying to say about memory, rather.
In the visual storytelling.
Yeah. And we never have to say it, right? We never have to say, oh, when you remember a thing, it's not quite accurate and you're at a distance from it and it feels like looking at it,
I mean, not to make this, we can make this entire podcast about David, I think, if we really wanted to. Yeah. But the thing about him that I think people sleep on is he did right before, like, year before you all met up and started talking about working together on a creator-owned project. He did Black Hand and Ironhead over at Panel Syndicate, which eventually led to that being an Image.
Right.
And he's, not trying to say just a writer or just an artist. He's not just an artist, though, and he is a storyteller, and he's written his own stuff, and he knows what he wants to do. And it seems like, I just had Chris Somney on the podcast, and we talked about his collaboration with Mark Waid and how they're both storytellers together. And it's not as delineated as just writer and artist. And it kind of seems like that's the case for you two as well.
Yeah, I think that's the case with
all of your collaborators.
Yeah, Val hasn't written for himself, but he should.
Yeah.
Emma, like, if anybody's listening to this and they haven't pre-ordered Anzuelo, you're going to want that one. Get that taken care of. And I like a collaborative process. I like the book to feel like a conversation in some way. And I think if I didn't, I should either learn to draw or write novels. And I would like to write a novel someday, which we've talked about before, I think. Like, that is on my list. But I like what I learn from working with other people. And it's kind of why I don't fall in love with their hand. I fall in love with their brain.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I can write for whatever the style is, but I need to like you. I need to like find you interesting and exciting.
Well, and it seems like when you were pursuing David in Captain Marvel and everything, what you were really trying to do is you're trying to find the thing that unleashed that enthusiastic art brain of his rather than who you think he is, so to speak.
Right, right.
I do want to bring up one character I think is interesting is Glory Holgate. Glory Holgate, for listeners that don't know, is a teenager that at first glance will probably be reminiscent of a witch. She's a member of SCFU. She's a total badass. The way that David draws her brings her to life in an uncommon way. It's like absolutely unbelievable.
Yes.
I'm curious as to like once you actually started drilling into this book and you started seeing David and the way he would draw these characters, did you find that that shifted what you wanted to do with any of them in response?
I think the answer to that has to be yes. Because this thing we talked about when we spoke before, right? Where I don't have a visual imagination. So I don't know what they look like until you show me.
Sure.
And then, the example I usually use for this, or there's two of them, are like Pennyroll in Bitch Planet, when Val turned in that design for her and she had this like one lock of curls. She was like bald headed except for this one lock of curls. I was like, what is that about? And he's like, I don't know. You're the writer. And then I was like, oh, okay. I know what that's about. That's about her grandmother. And we'll get to that maybe. And if we don't, I know, you know? And there was another time, I'm not sure if I think it was Robson Roca on Aquaman. There's a little boy that Wonder Woman interacts with. And he drew this little boy, and the little boy had cargo shorts that were full of stuff. Like the cargo shorts, the pockets, there was cargo in there.
Yeah.
Now, I remember looking at it and thinking, what's in his pockets? And then it was like, well, probably some seashells and a Matchbox car and a marble and some candy and an EpiPen. And like, I never got to doing anything with it, but it's those little things that you know once you see the design, and then you start thinking about, well, why did they choose that? But not why did the artist choose that? Why did the character choose that? Then you start building the character, and then you know things about them that inform the writing, right? It informs all of their choices. One of the cool things that David does is he's like, if you look through, you'll see all of the different places he echoes the design of the circle of Riley's head and the horns. He puts it all throughout the book in different moments. And then Riley and Lydia's connection, Lydia's a round face, but instead of the horns, she has those it's just like if you move the horns down, that's her braids, right? And then Glory is this, everybody had this teenager in their high school, I think I did. The one teenager who's somehow 35, you know?
Yeah.
Like she's way more mature than any of the rest of you and way more comfortable in her skin. And you're just like, how do you do that? You're made of magic.
Yeah.
And that's Glory. She's somehow in high school, but she's 35 and she's chill and she looks out for, and we'll learn some more things about her later, but she looks out for the big weirdos. And he figured out, he was like, you know, everything about where everybody else is circles, everything about Glory is points, like pointed nose, pointed hat, you know? And it was just like, oh, I love that.
And that's how his mind works, which is unbelievable. And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. In the borderlands between imagination and reality, between horror and fantasy, between life and death, you'll find The Autumn Kingdom #1 on sale this September from Oni Press. From master storyteller Cullen Bunn and visionary artist Christopher Mitten, follow one family's labyrinthine descent through a perilous forest where the local folklore is anything but a myth. This fall, a dark and enchanting new breed of fairy tale takes hold in The Autumn Kingdom #1, on sale now in comic shops everywhere. And now, back to the show. I do want to bring up, this is something that came up in the announcement from the Hollywood Reporter, but it definitely stands true, especially because I think after, when we talked last time on the podcast, it might have been shortly after you were walking your dad's dogs, which is something that the mom, Patty Cake, what she does in this book. There's a lot of your family present in this book.
Yes.
How did that help you unlock this book, like kind of turning the lens back on yourself and your family?
So it was scary. So my daughter said something. My daughter's very invested in this book and very involved in the book, which is really kind of an amazing experience for me as a mom. And we can come back to that when we talk about the marketing stuff too.
Sure.
She said I talked to her and I was like, T, I don't have, what's my elevator pitch? How do I explain FML? Because I don't know how to talk about it. And she goes, it's a very funny book about very not funny things. And I was like, oh, that's so good. And all of my, but there was one thing that she said where she said something, it must have been about mom. I don't think it was though, but maybe it must have been. She said something about, oh, that's you. And I was like, I'll tell you a secret, T. They're all me. Right.
Oh.
Like, I think just as writers, we try to transcend our own perspective, but I don't know that it's really entirely possible. Even when you're writing a character who's very other than your lived experience, and you're doing all of that research, and you're really trying to try on their skin. I wish there was a less creepy way to say that. I'm sure there is. You're still starting from some place of like, what would I be like if I were this kind of person who had this kind of lived experience, right? You're still always coming from the I when you're writing that first person experience. Also, I'm certain that the fact that I come from theater and I have actor training affects how I approach character creation, because I'm always kind of approaching it from, what if I were like this? How would that change me? Right. And so I was talking to Tia, I was like, well, they're all me. All of the books are all these different parts of me, but they're also then, also David and also Phil and also Emma and all. But from the script part, from where we're starting, I never really transcend the I, because I don't think anybody does. But the point of all of that is to say, at first I wanted to say this was my most personal book, but that's not really true, because they're all very personal. Pretty Deadly is incredibly personal. Pretty Deadly is very much about my figuring out how to be a parent, which I don't know that reads, but that's what it's about. And the difference is this one's literal.
Yeah, it presents as personal.
Yes. So this one, and then that was a conversation we had to have too, right? Where if you're basing a character off a living person and that person is an adult, I don't think you owe that person anything. I think, personally, I'm just like, you do you. There may be consequences. Be prepared, But if that person is a child, it's different. And so there were conversations that we had. Savvy, Riley, and Lil all have foundations in real people that we know. And real people that are kids. And so I asked all of them their permission to base these characters on them, and then had a conversation with them about, because a character is based on you, that doesn't mean that character is you. And if I were literally writing my children, I would not be able to ever put them in danger, which would not make for good drama, because they're my children.
Yeah.
And so they start from this place that is you, but then they become somebody else. Now, my intention is not to ever embarrass you. They've all read the scripts to make sure that there's nothing that's going to mortify them or feel as though I have invaded their privacy. And I would not give an adult that kind of power.
Right.
But with the kids, that was really important to me, especially that scene in the second issue with the shooter drill.
Yeah.
I was like, you need to know this is here, and you need to let me know if you don't want to be a part of this.
I do think that's one of the things that's really interesting, though, is like, this is an overused comparison, but I'm going to use it anyways because I do think it's an interesting indication of it. So, in a weird way, I feel like in some ways FML has more in common with manga than a typical Western book.
Sure, yeah.
Because it's like, it's very much grounded in reality, but it is this heightened reality that feels like almost like an anime energy to it, where it's like Riley has a transformation, literally physically, that happens in between the first and second issues, and it's treated in like a very normal way, in a way that's almost like this isn't that weird. And like, that's the type of energy that I find, like, even with like the shooter drill and stuff like that, it almost kind of has that like post-real energy, for a lack of better phrasing, because I don't even know if that's even a real phrase.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think all of that adds, like the cast and like this reality and everything adds to the vibrancy of the book. I do want to say one thing that's very real about it is, like, you know, you mentioned the shooter drill. It's one of the few books that actually embraces the pandemic in a way that most others haven't from a storytelling standpoint. I was trying to think of anything I've read in comics that have really done it to this degree, like from major publishers. And all I could really come up with was Marjorie Liu and Sana Takeda's The Night Hunters. Why was that something you wanted to include in this book in specific?
Because I think one of the things I wanted to write about was there was this moment during the pandemic when this was before we had the vaccines, and we were still very much in the house. We live in Portland, and the fires were closing in all around us, to the point where we were checking the evacuation maps every hour or so. We had put up plastic over our windows, and we had pans of water throughout the house to catch particulates from the air. And we weren't supposed to open the doors very often. And it was like, if we have to evacuate, where are we going to go?
Right.
And we have, you know, Matt, me, Grandma, 2 teenagers, 3 dogs, and a guinea pig. We all didn't fit in a car.
Yeah. And what hotel is taking 3 dogs in a guinea pig?
And it was just this, like, it felt terrifying and comical. And I think that's my husband and I are very different writers. We used to say the thing we have in common is our sense of humor. One of the television executives that we worked with said, no, the thing that you have in common is your ethical core, which I was like, ooh, I like that. That makes me feel good. I think that is probably true, because we don't have the same sense of humor, but we're both inclined to find things funny that aren't really funny. That is the way we cope with everything. And, you know, if you were in a relationship or partnership in that situation, and one of you found it funny and the other one didn't, that would be very bad.
Yeah.
But that the two of us were like, this is great. You know, like, that was a big thing.
Yeah.
So that moment, that feeling like, fuck is happening. The sky is orange. It is raining ash. There's a plague. Like, this is not the future I signed up for.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, and I can't hide it from my children, but I also don't want to be like, well, we fucked up the world. Good luck, kids. I don't like that giving them cynicism. I want them to have a way of looking forward to things, and I don't want them to feel doomed, you know? And so it was very much wanting to drive into the discomfort of that moment.
Well, I also like the fact that it's just like, it shows what living life was like in that moment. It's just like, like when they're getting out of the car in the first issue, and it's just like masks, and it's like just reprogramming your brain to like do these things. What did your daughter say again? It was the line about very funny things that are about unfunny, or what was it?
Yeah, it's a very funny book about very unfunny things.
Yeah, I mean, like, that's the thing is like, I mean, before we started recording, we were talking about medical problems, and it's like, I talked about how For listeners that don't know, which is 100% of you, I was bit by a shrew earlier this year and I get rabies shots. In the moment, it was a nightmare. Now, my wife and I think it's hilarious because it was weird as hell. But it's like, it's the type of thing that hindsight allows you, and like being able to interrogate that moment and all the things that you were going through. I'm sure that you can do things now that you weren't able to do then.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in that moment, even though I did think it was funny in the moment, I was also legitimately terrified, you know, that like, and the worst part of it for me was I don't want my kids to be afraid.
Sure.
And so just how do you balance? I don't want to lie to them. I don't want to hide uncomfortable feelings from them. I want to model for them that it's okay to be uncomfortable. It's okay to not have all of the answers. But they're also little. And I want them to feel like, oh, you don't have to solve this problem. Mom and dad got you, you know? And so balancing those things is really tough. So there was a lot of that, and the masculinity thing too, that, you know, I write all of these books and pieces that are, I'm unapologetically feminist. And I do genuinely think that women are largely mistreated in this world. And at the same time, I don't only want to talk about masculinity in the context of, I don't always want it to be preceded by toxic.
Sure.
Right? Like, and I want to see and help build archetypes for positive, non-toxic masculinity. And I think unless, you know, the patriarchy hurts everybody, right? Sexism hurts everybody. And, you know, we're seeing that reflected right now in the way Waltz's son was attacked for showing emotion, and like setting aside his autism diagnosis. Like, that's not the thing that made it not okay. You know, that was a beautiful moment that young man had, displaying, wasn't choosing to display it. He was overcome with the love that he felt for his father and how proud he was of his father. And that was magical and beautiful. And there was nothing weak about that. And there was nothing unmasculine about that. This framing that, like, oh, it would have been okay to go after a teenage kid for having emotions if he weren't autistic. It's like, no, not okay. You're missing the point here. And as a mom and as someone who can be very vocal about that, you know, I had this concern that how do I have those conversations and speak what I believe to be a truth without demonizing a whole identity?
Sure.
Or villainizing a whole identity. And then I drew this connection between, and this is not, I always want to be very clear that this is not my, I don't know if this is true or not, you know, like I don't think that, but for me, it was interesting. My son has always been very enamored of misunderstood monsters, right? So he loves King Kong and Godzilla and Frankenstein. Like, he doesn't like the monsters that are actually monsters. Like, he hates Freddy Krueger, right? He likes the ones that are like, no, they're not. They're only bad because we're afraid of them. Like, we've somehow made them bad. And I drew this parallel that, like, oh, is that like a masculinity metaphor? That, like, yeah, I'm big and strong, but I'm not bad. I'm not mean. I don't want to, you know, like, I don't know. There was something there for me. And that was the germ of Riley's
transformation.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why I like the fact that the first two issues, or I presume the rest of the series will be the POV issues, because it takes you inside them. There was a part of me that was wondering, I was like, did Clayton Cole's The Letter emulate your own handwriting for Patty's journal? Probably not.
It's not mine, but he nailed that, didn't he?
Yeah, he did.
Oh, it's so good.
Well, I mean, there's so many little moments that Clayton nails, like when Gloria is all up in the other guy that's in the metal band, where he's like, we're STFU, shut the fuck up, not a band with girls. And like with the way he brings STFU to life as a logo, it's just like, it's so smart. It's so good.
No, he's terrific. Yeah.
Well, let's get into the other side of things, because you have this book. It's fantastic. I mean, seriously, I cannot emphasize that enough to everyone else. It is just like, you got to read it. So the interesting thing about it, you talked about this. You haven't launched a book since Bitch Planet. That was almost a different world then. Do you feel like you have to almost relearn the creator-owned world and what it takes and the right things to do to promote it from the last time you did all this?
Yes. And I don't know what numbers are successful numbers anymore. I don't know. I mean, there's just so many, and things that I thought I knew, I didn't know. Like, I didn't learn until I was talking to Katie Pride that, or maybe it actually might have been, I think it was from your podcast, actually. I didn't know that those ICV2, that those numbers are only from the stores that have a particular point of sale system, and a surprisingly small number of stores actually have a
point of sale
POS system,
yeah,
let alone that POS system. And so those numbers aren't reflective. I don't know that those tell you anything.
Right. They're interesting, but they're not representative samples. Let's put it like that.
Yeah. And then there's like just the same old marketing stuff where you're just like, okay, well, here's an example, right? I'm doing a certain amount of marketing to people who are already established comic book readers and people who follow Matt and my stuff, because I never want to take those people for granted. And I want to make sure that they know about the book and are excited about it and have, whatever they need. Like David, actually, this was his whole idea, was to do this pre-order comic.
And it's wonderful.
Yeah. And somebody replied and said, like, oh, this makes me feel like a villain for trade waiting. I made a joke that was a little like, oh, you're not a villain for trade waiting, and you should be able to get it in whatever format that you want. This is just for the folks that are going to ensure that there is a trade, which is like, it's a smart ass remark. I'm a shopper. Nobody's ever going to guilt me into buying anything. I don't want to be bullied. I don't want to be guilted. And I don't want to be told I need to buy it in a format I don't want to buy it in. Like, if you want to read it in trade, read it in trade. Thank you for wanting to read it at all. And if you are going to read it in singles, or you think you might want to read it in singles, if you could pre-order it, boy, that would help us out. But like, if you don't get to it, I hope you'll pick it up anyway. And if you want to, like, I'll go out of my way to try to help people find, like, somebody was saying that could they pre-order it digitally? I'm like, I don't know a lot about that. Let me find out. There's a whole other conversation. The guy was like, I just read all my comics on the internet for free. And I was like, I hope you're talking about Hoopla. Which is the other thing too, right? Like, I have feelings about pirated comics. I'm not going to go after the kids, but if you're a middle-aged dude with kids who's still pirating your comics, what's your deal? Like, you're like, ooh, you're edgy. You still got it, Dark Lord. Like, dude, go to the library. If you need to get the book for free, like, I'm not trying to, there's a commercial aspect to it too. And we all deserve to be paid for our labor. Like, but if you want to read the book for free, there are lots of ways to read the book for free. Librarians are my favorite people. Let's support libraries.
I mean, even Hoopla has single issues now. I mean, like, you could read the new issue of Saga this week if you so desire, because it's going to be on there.
Yes, it's wonderful. And like, no hard feelings. I'm for it.
Mm-hmm.
There have been lots of times in my life I couldn't afford comics. Like, no shame in that. I'm not trying to guilt or bully anybody into anything. Anyway, I got off point here. But yes, so marketing has changed. And I have been so on Twitter for so long. And Twitter made its heel turn. And I finally noped out. And I don't regret it. But I don't have a central... Twitter was this like central hub from which you could utilize all of these other tools to reach various audiences. I don't have that anymore. And so now we're all kind of trying to find what is our quote unquote social media strategy or whatever. And on top of that, this is a thing that's so frustrating to me because it's literally the conversation this hasn't changed in 20 years I've been in this industry, right? This hasn't changed. So there's a true crime aspect to the book, right? So I listen to a lot of true crime, very basic white girl here. And I was listening to one of the podcasts that I enjoy, and one of the hosts mentioned reading comics. And I was like, ooh. And so I took a chance and I wrote to them and I was like, I know you do author interviews every once in a while. And I know that they're mostly true crime authors because of the true and true crime. But one of the things that I'm trying to engage with the book, of the many things, is the way that people use true crime sort of process trauma and to have something to hang their anxiety on, and the ethics of somebody else's horror, the worst thing that ever happened to them, being your like soothing entertainment. Like, that's weird.
Yeah.
And there's all kinds of ethical stickiness with that. And this podcast has engaged with that a little bit. So I wrote to them. I did an informational interview with another podcaster that I really love. And then I wrote to this one podcast and was like, would you be interested in talking about this book with me? And they said, yes. And so I sent them issues to read and we did the podcast. And I can't remember when it goes up, but I got so excited about it because I was like, oh, look, you guys, the Venn diagram of the people who were already going to order the book and the people who listen to that podcast, that's two circles, you know? And so like, this is great. This is like, and then I remembered at the end of the interview, they're going to ask me, where do we get your book?
Yeah.
And then I have to explain, okay, well, what I want you to do is order it 3 months in advance.
And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. The hits just keep coming on Zoop. There's still plenty of time to support campaigns from Simpsons legend Bill Morrison, The Art of Dissenter from Dustin Nguyen and Jeff Lemire, Great Pacific, the completely trashed edition from Ice Cream Man's Martin Morazzo and Joe Harris, as well as dozens of campaigns coming soon that you can sign up for launch notifications on. Most notably, campaigns from the legendary Joe Quesada, the new publisher Panic Entertainment, Monster Forge Productions, and the final release from the late Ed Piskor, Switchblade Shorties. Zoop would like to thank all the creators who have recently submitted projects and urge more creators to submit your project to Zoop. Click the Submit Your Project link at zoop.gg as they are providing services to even more creators than ever before. And now, back to the show. I mean, it's tough. I mean, that's always the most difficult thing about this is like the marketing side of things has a lot of roadblocks to it. There's monetary ones. Most publishers don't have significant monetary backing for their marketing efforts. There's time. I mean, I do want to give you a compliment. Your email newsletter you wrote about like interviews and about like some of the stuff you have to ask yourself about it. It actually made me very introspective about my own interviews. I'm like, does my podcast have value? I don't know. It was really great, but there's all these things you have to consider. And that's the thing is like, there's always the factor too of like, how do you activate an audience that is fundamentally going to have to wait? And then also, like, how do you activate an audience when really the most crucial audience for you is retailers, making sure retailers are ordering the book. And like, that's one of the tricky things about all of this is it's like trying to find a balance between like, you want to get them active, but they have to follow this type of active. It's like a good comp, get out the vote. You're trying to get out the readers and like, in a very specific way, guiding them. I do want to compliment the comic that you and David did for the pre-order thing. I like that it was just basically saying, this is a lot more simple than you think it is. It wasn't like, you got to do this or the book's going to die, you know?
Right.
And so like making it simple, I think that's one of the things that comics doesn't have, to steal a reference from a Staples commercial from a million years ago, an easy button. And like, I think that type of thing helps. And I like what you're doing. I like the fact that you're thinking outside of just trying to convert the converted. You're also trying to reach out elsewhere. But that does introduce complications.
Yeah. And you know, it is much easier than people think. And like I had somebody at one point, I was like, it's not too early to pre-order. And somebody actually'd me and they were like, well, you know, it's not in the system yet. And it was like,
write it down.
Do you have a pad of paper?
Yeah. Didn't Katie Pride from Books with Pictures text you like right after they got the first pre-order?
Yeah. It's like, just look, there's only so much I can do for you here, buddy. like write it down. But I'm also trying to do this thing, but I have not, I've dropped the ball on it a little bit just for time because, this is a thing we talked about before, like comics are my side job, right? So when I think about marketing a book, I always try to think about what do I want? When I write a book, I'm writing, what do I want to read, right? And when I'm marketing a book, like, I don't want somebody to bully me. I don't want somebody to guilt me. I don't want somebody to like spank me for not wanting to read it in a particular format or whatever. It sounds kind of Machiavellian, but it's like, hi, welcome to capitalism. I'm not really a villain who's trying to separate anybody from their money. I want this book to be read because I think you'll like it.
Mm-hmm. And you're trying to shorten the path and simplify the process.
Yes. So I'm trying to make it so it can get into the hands of people who might find something of value in it, right? Also, I do make my living with my work. So it's not purely, I don't know, I'm not, there. I imagine there is some Machiavellian something here. I don't know. Anyway, Bill Hicks like got in my brain. But like with Captain Marvel, it was a deliberate choice I want women to read this book. How do I make women feel comfortable in a superhero space where they haven't traditionally felt that comfortable, right? For good reason, at that time anyway. And so there was some deliberate things done in the writing to center the female reader. And then there were things like naming the Carol Corps, finding places to help women readers find each other so that they could kind of have a community that would help them, not just with the Marvel universe, but with anything that they wanted to read, the way that you kind of need a helper when you first find your way into shared universe superhero comics, right? So interacting a lot on Tumblr, signal boosting a lot of, I signal boosted any fan art I could find and tried to get people to be able to see themselves as readers of this stuff, right? That like, oh, look, here's somebody just like you who loves this character. You should talk, right? And making dog tags and making Carol Corps membership cards. Those are all things I went out of pocket on doing marketing for $1 billion company. But I wasn't marketing for the $1 billion company. I was marketing because I wanted this book to be a success to help me build an audience for more books that I would like and books I would like to make, right? Mm-hmm. And so that was very deliberate. Then with Bitch Planet, there was a very deliberate choice to use the back matter in Bitch Planet to create a kind of feminist magazine where we could talk about what do these things mean and what is an intersectionality? And hey, let me introduce you to the work of Kimberly Crenshaw, and making it a deliberately inviting space. So both of those books are sort of about building community in different ways. And so then when I'm thinking about FML, what is the thing that I'm craving right now? And I miss fun. Mm-hmm. And I miss, the algorithm has destroyed the process of discovery. I miss discovery. I've run out of time, so I haven't executed on it as well as I wanted to, but what's going to end up happening is this thing that was supposed to be a run-up to the book is going to continue alongside the book, I'm afraid. And maybe that's not a bad thing anyway. But the idea was I wanted to build these fun things in, but I've never done it before in this way, so I'm a little figuring it out. So like the first thing I did was in the newsletter.
The acrostic?
Yes. So if you read to the bottom of the newsletter, there's always or not always, but recently, if you read to the bottom of the newsletter, there's something that like you read to the bottom. So here's a treat. And so I think the first one was like, you read to the bottom. So there's a hidden message in this newsletter. Can you find it? And then there was a thing that happened that the version that went out in the email, like the carriage returns were different.
Oh, no.
One of the carriage returns was missing. So if you find the acrostic, it says FML is the name of the ook.
Oh, no.
Which is, oh, no, but also the most FML thing in the world.
Yes,
right?
Totally.
So it's like, oh, I should just pretend I did that on purpose. I did not do it on purpose. So that one was like moderately successful. And then the next one, I did a word search. And at first, I wasn't going to include the words because my fear was if I give you all the words that are in the word search, then you're just going to read those and you won't do the word search. But then it was like, well, if I make it too hard, nobody's going to do it either.
Right.
So I included the words, and exactly what I was afraid was going to happen happened. People just read the words and they were like, that sounds good. And they didn't do the word search. But it was like, so then I had to follow up with, hey, you guys, if you do the word search, there's a hidden message. And it was just like, what I'm trying to create is that feeling of discovery that like you found this thing, not I told you, go look under that rock.
Right.
Right. So if I tell you and you go look under the rock and you find something, that's not as fun as if you're like, if I tell you there's something hidden here and you start looking for it and then you look under the rock and find it. Right. And so that's the experience I'm trying to create. And I also want so I'm trying to thread all of this stuff together too. So there's like the URL that's hidden in the leftover letters from the word search will take you to the band's, the in-world STFU website where Glory has a blog and Glory's been blogging. And then there's a next step that's going to lead you to another thing. And if I can get some other stuff off my desk so I can come back to it, these things will eventually lead to some things that will be real world experiences, which is why I have 40 cigar boxes behind me that I need to fill and send out.
I appreciate the mad science mode you're in. I mean, that's kind of where you have to be. I do like the fact that you've also built in, I mean, this is something you do with Bitch Planet, but each single issue will have like essays on music and true crime and interviews and more. That is something that I think has become increasingly important, where it's not that you don't want to say that the comic isn't enough, but sometimes when you have like those perks that you're not going to find. I know. Well, yeah, no. But I mean, on top of that, though, it's like, here's a good example. I mean, it's like, would the Brimper community have become as robust as it was without letter daddies?
No.
Exactly. And so it's like these things help form community around the books. And
right.
Like, I think that stuff is super valuable. But just a couple more questions. I did want to ask Dark Horse. That is an interesting part of this. I have an idea as to why they were the right fit for the series. What was your reason for why it was the right fit?
So it's not complicated. It's, I love Image. Image has been my creator-owned home for a very long time, and I still think that they're the best deal in comics. But they are the best deal in comics, and they require you to. I mean, they were founded by artists who were doing everything themselves,
right?
And so it's kind of set up. You get a Image handbook, and you're gonna do everything yourself. And they do have Kat that does marketing, but Kat does, I think it's Kat and one other person, and they market all of Image's books.
Kat and Kat.
Yeah, there's two Cats, right?
Yeah, different spelling, but still, yeah.
Yeah, and like that's an impossible task. And going back to the stuff that we said before, and like, Dark Horse is Kara at Dark Horse is wonderful, Amy at Dark Horse is wonderful, but ultimately they don't know the book as well as I do. They don't know my market as well as I do. I have to kind of think of the publisher's marketing as supplementary to our own, unfortunately. That's just the reality of it. But also, I've always had an in-house editor. So I had Lauren Sankovich that worked for us for ages and edited all of my Image books. And I still work with Lauren on the Good Trouble stuff. And she's absolutely terrific, but she went off to get her master's in geology, and she's doing like a lot of science communication stuff. I love her to death, but she doesn't. I don't have an in-house editor anymore. I know Denise could learn it, but Denise has her hands full helping me manage everything else.
Denise being your assistant.
Yeah, Denise Espinoza, who is my assistant and just a terrific human being. And I should plug her podcast, which is called Geek in the City, and she's wonderful.
And you just appeared on it.
Yeah, I did. You're right. So I went to Dark Horse with this one because I just wanted to write the scripts.
Yeah, they have infrastructure.
Yeah. Image has too. I don't know in the end if it works out that different as far as certainly not the marketing thing. I would have been doing the same. But, like I called Eric and let him know, and he was bummed but supportive. And there's, I guess, a third thing, which wasn't super in my, not at the forefront, but there is just the idea that you want to diversify a little bit just in case.
Yeah.
So, and Daniel Chabon.
Yeah. Oh, is he the editor?
He's the editor.
Amazing.
He's terrific. He's on those 2-hour calls with us.
Mm-hmm.
He's lovely, and I really enjoy him. Yeah. So it wasn't a super. I just felt like it would be easier. I'm not sure if it was, but I don't regret it at all.
I mean, here's the thing: is I do want to know about Daniel Chabon, editor for Dark Horse. One of the few people in comics I've never heard a single bad word for. Just like everyone loves him. Everyone loves him. And I think it's probably for a very good reason. But the thing about it is like, it's kind of like the mad science thing for marketing. You don't know until you try it. And so
Right.
It's like, that's part of the value of diversity too, or diversifying your portfolio, where you go to other publishers and stuff like that. You find out if it works better, and if it doesn't, you can always go back to Image for something else, or you can stay with Dark Horse. You can try God knows what else. There's probably another publisher being created right now.
Oh, there's like 6, I think, that have been created just since we started this interview. Yes.
It's unbelievable. Yeah, I mean, seriously, the comics, geez Louise. Okay, so I did want to ask about the totality, not about FML. You are developing a couple TV shows these days. Beyond that, you have the rest of your life and everything that goes into it, your comic work, travel for things like Worldcon. You just came back from that for the Hugos, and a ton of other things that we don't know anything about. That's a lot of competing responsibilities, to say nothing of the desires you may have as a storyteller to do all these different things at some point in your life.
Right.
How do you figure out the right next steps to take? Because that's a lot.
Very poorly. I am struggling. I have taken on too much, and I am at a point in my life where I have teenagers who still need me and who are my primary, they have to come first.
Sure.
And I also have, my parents are failing, and I don't think either one of them will listen to this, so I think I could speak fairly freely. I moved my dad up here. He's in an assisted living about 10 minutes away from me. I go and walk his dogs. Matt and I, and in fact, I've been struggling on some deadlines right now. So Matt has been doing both the morning and the evening walks of his dogs the last couple days. And then I'm trying to make sure that my mom is safe. And that involves getting my mom a place to live and her husband. And there's that responsibility takes a lot of time. I'm an only child, so I can't share this with anybody. And then watching some of what is happening with them is, genetic or luck or whatever. And then some of it is, I think a lot of baby boomers just thought they were going to be young forever and that they would always bounce back from everything. And so kind of looking at what's happening with them and how stressful it is for me, and realizing I had my kids at 37 and 39. So when I get to their age, my children will be close to 20 years younger than I am now. And I don't want to strap them with what I'm going through at a time when their careers are just taking off. And so, I don't think I've missed leg day since this whole thing started happening, because it's just like, okay, I have to take my health very seriously, if not for me. I mean, ideally for me.
Right. It's an investment in your life and your kids' lives.
But I can't put my kids through that.
Yeah.
And there's certain things I can't control, but the things that I can control, I need to control. But yeah, I mean, I think part of what FML is just admitting, oh no, I'm struggling. There's nothing on my plate that I don't care about.
Right.
Right. I care deeply about both of the shows that I'm developing. I care deeply about FML. Emma and I are in the early stages of the next volume of Pretty Deadly. I have something to prove. I think volume 3 of Pretty Deadly was our best volume, and I want to see if we can level that up, right? And I want to do more Historia. And Bitch Planet, I've been telling people for 10 years, Bitch Planet's coming back. Nobody believes me anymore, but it is.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's nothing that I'm like, I shouldn't be doing that. I don't care about it. These are all things that I care about a lot. But I also need to sleep. I'm not a fast writer. I wish to God I was, but I'm not. My first draft's never good. And I need to be having a life to have something to write about. I think that there's a thing that happens in comics sometimes where, and this happens a lot in superhero comics, where we get to a point where people are just making comics about other comics. And it's like, oh, buddy, you got to get out. Like this isn't about anything anymore. It's now about continuity. Like it's about somebody else's initiative. You need to find something to write about, to translate through the lens of that superhero comic, that's something you care about. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be about, in fact, some of the best superhero comics, oddly enough, are about very small things. It needs to be human, and it needs to maybe not be about publishing.
James Tynion, I think he called it inputs. You need to make sure you have other inputs. And it's a very technical way to put it, but I totally agree with him. I do want to say, all this in context, I really do love the title FML, but it's a perfect title. I mean, it could not be more perfect. Also, I do want to emphasize, when I was first asking about the path to this coming together, 5 years for some people might hear that and they're like, that's a long path to this becoming a real book. But I think sometimes people forget that all of this stuff doesn't happen in a vacuum. Like FML is not your life. It's a part of your life. It's a slice of your life, but it's not all of it. And like, that's something I think people forget about when they're thinking about comic creators or authors or people who make video games or whatever, is that's not the totality of their existence. And sometimes other things come first, and that's just the way it is.
And there's also you don't decide, I'm going to write this comic. It's about this. I'm going to sit down to write it, and okay, page 1, panel 1.
Right.
Like, oh, that's not, maybe there is someone for whom that is how that happens. I am not that someone. There is a lot of note taking. There's a lot of refining of ideas. The book is never about what I think it's going to be about. Right. So I thought FML was going to be about this adventuring party. We have 5 pages drawn. We have the characters are developed and sketched and turnarounds. They're out the window. They don't exist anymore.
I think there are aspects of those other books in there, though.
Yes. Oh, 100%. I think I had to write that to get to what I...
Yeah. It was funny when you were describing them earlier. I was just like, this sounds like it led to Glory, or this led to the group, or something like that. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. But it's not time wasted. It's the development process. It's how you figure out, using the Stephen King thing, it's how you figure out what part of the marble isn't the statue.
Right.
And if I knew how to speed that up, that didn't leave me feeling like a liar or bored, I would do it. But I don't know how to make anything good and fast. And which is why I'm not, as it turns out, I am not a good fit for monthly comics, which is why FML has to be done so far. That's why you could have 2 almost complete issues to read, and we're working on 4 before 1 ever comes out. And by the time we get to 1, we might have most of it, is just because otherwise I can't be monthly.
Yeah. I think a big part of all this is you have to know yourself. And it seems like you know yourself pretty well. Actually, readers who read FML will probably know different parts of yourself very soon. But Kelly Sue, that is actually all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about FML, the wild world of marketing, your life, and everything else. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, David, you've been so kind and so generous, and I appreciate how you make room for my meanderings.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with writer Kelly Sue DeConnick. You can find her work in the upcoming FML at Dark Horse Comics. Big thanks to Deanna Chapman for stepping in to edit this episode. If it sounds better than usual, it's because of her. Love Off Panel, want to support it? Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts today and give the show a rating or review while you're at it, but 5 stars only. You can also support the show by backing it on Patreon. Find the show at patreon.com/offpanel. And when you back it on there, you get early access to each week's podcast, as well as weekly content and more. Want even more? Subscribe to my Eisner Award-nominated subscription comic site Sketched at sketch.com for long-form articles, interviews, and the rest of the site's content. You can find Off-Panel and Sketched on social media by following on Twitter and Instagram at @SketchComic or following me at @SlicedFriedGold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Milton Lawson, David Wilson, Joe, Benjamin Wilkins, Chris Hacker, John Neesmith, John Auerbach, Dustin Weaver, Ninja Assassin Love Story Webcomic, David Byrne, Brandon Heyman, Aiden Hammond, Kenny Myers, Faith Aaron Hicks, Yeah Comics, Ben Rowe, Cameron Brown, Jonathan Breen, Danny Ollie, Charlie Stickney, Tom Drennan, Jeremy Thomas Burke, Jared Schwab, Scott Dunn, Chip Mosher, Seth Pomeroy, James McEwen, Andrew Lehman, Christina Merkler, Scott Place, Travis Gibb, Darcy Van Polgees, Tom Evans, Reed Beeman, Kelly Sue DeConnick, Max Wood, Jeremy Lambert, Brian Holt, Near Levy, Jason Hussa, Kieran Gillen, Jonathan Kent Uratam, Harry Johnson, Jingo Borent, James Tynan IV, Chris Langford, Jason Wood, Tom Peachy, Ben Domstead, Rom V, Nick Walker, Patrick Coyle, Isaac Oren, Capes and Tights Podcast, Klaus Vandeven, Submen Industries, Jack Mulqueen, Carl Kerschel, Robert Masella, Elza Chartier, Luke Nakashoji, Dr. Luke, Scott Hazelwood, Canadian by Proxy, Bradley Rader, Carl Choi, Brandon Tapillis, Patrick Bauer, Declan Shalvey, Dan Guarino, Adam Freeman, Ben Wild, Brian Klein Q, Liana Kangas, Nick Bennett, Daniel Whitfield, Susanna Polo, Reed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, Andrew Carita, Stephen Holt, Philip Myra, Chris Pachalo, Torrin Grunbeck, Buzz Bubbles, Christopher Todd, Transmitter Down, Waltz Comics and Books, Akil Wilson, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Wesley Giff, Sean Kirkham, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwan, Vita Yala, Akil, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, David Kelly, Nick Polito, Jason Assey, Adam Bogart, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendrick, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Colin McMahon, Adam Heifel, Fiona Staples, Mark Abnett, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonakos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks from Wolfpack for letting me use their song Outro as the show's opening theme, and to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off-Panel's outro and ad music just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.